enjoy the movie, and thank you for being here. Just want to have a few comments about the 52nd Pennsylvania. If you notice when they arrived down in Beaufort, it was June 6th. The 52nd had been at Beaufort since the first of the year, but just before June 6th, General Quincy Gilmore had moved down there to begin a siege of Charleston. And they had made no decision as to who was going to lead the troops. And so it was quite a moment of bravery for them to step forward and do that. But any number of people could have done that, and any number of the white folks in that presentation could have been the 52nd. I know when I first saw this movie, that could be my great-great-grandfather. I thank them for their bravery, and I thank God for keeping them on cue. As soon as the movie at the end says that Battery Wagner was never taken, but the troops that were left behind, and there were 4 units, in addition to the 54th, there was another colored unit that was raised locally. There was a 52nd, and there was a 127th New York, and I believe later on a Rhode Island regiment joined them. What the impetus of the siege was to secure Fort Sumter. And they knew that in order to get it, they would have to get into Morris Island and Battery Wagner. So they essentially cut off the supply route to get to Charleston and made it very difficult for them to keep the people in the battery itself fed. So they actually backed out, they retreated, moved back into Charleston, and by September 7th, the 52nd, and I think they were augmented by a couple more regiments, moved in and stayed for the duration of the war on Morris Island. I wanted to just make a couple comments about the importance of the 52nd's role, because I think that being up there and being brave and all that is fine, but the 52nd had a symbolic role in turning the tide. On February 18th of 1865, that's 160 years ago, they moved in to be the first unit to put the American flag on Fort Sumter since the war began there 4 years earlier. I have a couple of images I want to share with you. Years ago, a reenactment group from Ohio came in to perform as the 52nd Pennsylvania Regiment. The picture that Paul is holding here is the actual dramatic reenactment, but I can pretty much guarantee you that they didn't come with that kind of ferocity, but they certainly had the enthusiasm to make for the day. This picture that was illustrated in 1961 on the 100th anniversary of the bombing of Fort Sumter gave a depiction of 2 boats coming in of I think 15 total men. And according to the official war records, that is the more obvious, correct documentation. The 52nd had the only boat infantry left in Charleston Harbor at the time. It had 40 boats, but only 2 went in to reclaim Fort Sumter. Augustus Gregg, who was the commanding officer for the people on Morris Island, had seen the bravery of these men, and he jumped aboard one of the boats with John Hennessy, who was a person leading the boat infantry. John Hennessy was from Pottsville, and second in command was Philo Burr from Ashopping. Both of them were given the honor to bring the commanding officer into Charleston, where they reclaimed Charleston. Not 100% sure that it had been completely evacuated, but when they got there, they were the first troops to reclaim Charleston because their soldiers in Charleston had evacuated. They left the people behind, and the mayor of Charleston, Charles Macbeth, had recapitulated points of surrender because they had nobody to protect them. And so if you go back to the official records, you can read where these folks helped to reclaim leadership at Charleston. And we have a couple of journals here that were written the days around the time of reclaiming the fort and then moving into Charleston. And it's quite remarkable to realize that our local folks played a significant role at that time in history. I wanted to share that beyond this effort, the journals themselves tell how the guys got back to Pennsylvania. You guys can set those down. Thank you. And so it's very interesting to realize that these are real live folks. Where's this one? The fellow on the upper left, that's John Hennessy. He led the boat command, and right next to him is Philo Burr. We have 3 posters of 50 of the men whose photographs have survived and are currently in our Grand Army Republic Museum in Scranton. We are uncovering more. We have identified 340 graves, but we are guessing it could be as many as 1,900 of the 52nd Regiment. This handsome gentleman is my great-great-grandfather, but these are the fellows over here. John Cunningham was a significant player in Wyoming County and Luzerne County. Fellow on the far right in the middle, that's Frank Bunnell, who was a later congressman from Tunkhannock. He is buried in the Gravel Hill Cemetery. And far here, that is Henry Hoyt, who was a future governor of Pennsylvania. In the second, this is Ezra Ripple, who was a later mayor of Scranton, and he's probably one of the only Civil War soldiers that has a bronze bust in his memory. He played a very significant role in helping to educate the public on the role that the Civil War played in upsetting the years that it went on. He is If you walk in the museum today, you'll see his bronze bust, but you'll also see pictures of him because he helped collect all of the historical stuff. On July 3rd, 1864, thank you, Erica. On July 3rd, 1864, this is a larger picture of Mr. Ripple. On July 3rd, 1864, they thought they had about achieved getting into Fort Sumter. And they went on a reconnaissance mission thinking they would claim a group that was at Fort Johnson and be on their way. And the war would have ended probably 9 months earlier. Unfortunately, the 127th New York, which was slated to back them up, never showed up. And so the tide went out before the boys from Pennsylvania could get out. And they were all captured and ended in prisoner of war camp, including Mr. Ripple. He was one of the lucky ones. He spent 3 months at Andersonville and another 5 months at the Florence Stockade in South Carolina. It's now a national cemetery. In 1905, which is when this picture was taken, he was appointed by Governor Samuel Pennybacker as one of 5 surviving prisoners of war to come out with a report on how Pennsylvanians were treated at Andersonville. Unfortunately, 40 years was quite a bit too late to be addressing that issue. But there are 10 persons from Wyoming County who are at Andersonville today, probably more. There are 33 persons who are at the Beaufort National Cemetery. There are 32 persons at Dunmore Cemetery here in Scranton that made it back home, but eventually time ran out. And so I want to lift these people up because they too had a significant role of importance. What's important about Wyoming County is that Battery B was wholly raised in Wyoming County. 192 soldiers were part of the unit. Among them were Charles Dana, the younger brother of Edmund Dana, who was the commanding officer of the 143rd. But there's some interesting stories I'd like to share with you about some of the people from Wyoming County. In the Eaton Baptist Cemetery is Danford Wakefield. In his obituary, it said that he couldn't speak for 15 months while the war was going on. His father-in-law was Benjamin Bullock, who was a musician, and obviously was able to communicate to his son-in-law. Thomas Jane, who was the commanding officer for Company B, died in 1913. And if you look at the 40-plus people who are promoting that name on Ancestry.com, not a single one of them gives Thomas Jane's picture. He has a massive tombstone in Vaughn Cemetery. But what is not told, the collateral damage of war, is that in 1913,
Thomas James jumped in the Susquehanna River and committed suicide. Robert Bannatyne, who's buried at Sunnyside, was a future postmaster for Tunkhannock. Jerome Furman, he's buried as St. John's Evangelical Church Cemetery in Walhalla, South Carolina, which is not any of the locations of where the 52nd was, because after witnessing what Robert Gould Shaw had done with the 54th, he ended up and served as a white commanding officer for a colored troop. Unfortunately, he was leading his soldiers to exiting the Civil War service. And he was assassinated on the spot by some bushwhackers. His brother had been previously killed at Fort Moultrie 2 years before the war started, and he had 2 other brothers who survived Company B. All 3 of them were initially in Company B. William Gavitt, who's buried up in the Lynn Cemetery in Springville, he died in 1883, where he was a Methodist preacher at Center Moreland. He stopped what he was doing in 1863 because of his devotion to country and became a soldier. I think within a year he decided that he wanted to follow his earlier calling, and General Gilmore appointed him as chaplain to the 52nd Regiment. George Kennard, who's buried in the Overfield Cemetery in Mashopin, later sheriff of this county. Many of you may know his home. He purchased a Sterling house and turned it into the Kennard Hotel. And many of you, like me, were probably born in the Old Tyler Hospital. Frank Bunnell was the future congressman that went off. Daniel Lau, who provided us one of the regimental journals. He's buried in the Jersey Hill Cemetery, but he joined for service at age 28 and served until 65 and was part of the boat infantry. He was later a funeral home director in Wyalusing. Theodore Bartron, who has a marker in the Prevost Cemetery up on Russell Hill. We're not sure he's had a burial there because he was killed down at Fair Oaks. Levi Ferris, who was also killed at Fair Oaks, is buried at the Seven Pines National Cemetery in Henrico County, Virginia. And we suspect that maybe where Bartron is as well. Ferris had 2 brothers, John and Henry, who en route to battle stopped at the Alexandria Hospital because they were both very sick, and they died on Christmas Day in 1864. Their father, Simeon Ferris, was in Company H, not exactly sure why he did not serve with his children, but he was a shoemaker. And Philo Burr was also a shoemaker, and it's suspected that one shoemaker per company was better fit. Urias Mowry, who's buried in the Lacey Street Cemetery, joined at age 18, but 11 days after his unit disbanded in the summer of 1865, he died. and is buried next to his brother, who also died in the Civil War. Tilliston Smith had the indignity of official records of being told that he deserted from service. However, if you go to the Laraysville Cemetery, the service in 1864, if you go to the Laraysville Cemetery, you will find that he actually died in 1863. So it's probably a bit difficult to get out of his grave. Philo Burr, who played a significant role in the Good Infantry, he actually had been wounded at Fair Oaks 2 years before, and so he lived with the wound all the way through his life. That just gives you a picture of some of the folks that are out there. We are trying to assemble, and hopefully we can do it by Memorial Day, all 192 from Wyoming County, whatever happened to them all. But I want us to be quite aware of the fact that, like General Sherman said, war is hell, but they worked through it, and they provided us with an enormous range of honor. We are also concerned about the folks who are at Andersonville, because we know of 10, but according to the official record, there are at least 40 whose final resting place has never been identified. Is Billy still here? This young man's great-great-grandfather had 2 older brothers who ended up at Andersonville. And if you contact the Andersonville Cemetery people, they tell you that they were released before the war ended, but the family has no clue who they were released to. I have a bunch of things I would love to say, but in the end of the movie, there are actually 2 assaults. The one you saw in Glory, they suffered deaths for 118 officers and 1,357 men, with the 54th bearing the brunt of punishment that day. But the war went on. Although they lost that battle, the 52nd helped them to win the war. And within a matter of months, they were home in Pennsylvania. There's one other thing that I'd like to address that we're here. Paul, if you could come forward. And this past November, we were notified at the Civil War Museum in Scranton that a sword that belonged to one of our namesake, Ezra Griffin, who's in the 143rd, was put up for sale. Unfortunately, it had been stolen from our museum in the 1960s or 70s. We're not exactly sure. I've only been a member of the unit since 1986. But one of the things that we are looking to do is to get the sword back to Scranton. It is a dealer out in Arizona bought it. He has offered it to us. We've never had any dealing with him before last winter. But he is willing to sell it to us at a handsome price of, I think, $5,800. We've raised about $2,000 so far, but we are wanting to let the public know, and this is really our first opportunity to speak to it publicly, that if you have any mind of helping to donate to the cause, Paul can talk to you about it. We have some issues we have to come up with the money before the end of June, or end of May, end about mid-June. So that's something that we're working on. If you know somebody that we should talk to or whatever, we would certainly appreciate hearing from you.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everybody. My name's Paul, and like Bob, we volunteer with the Grand Army of the Republic Civil War Museum that's currently located in the Steamtown Mall in downtown Scranton. Unfortunately, our collection was buried in the basement of Scranton City Hall for many years, but now it's on display properly. So, any of you folks find yourself in downtown Scranton, please stop in and take a look at the collection. We brought along just one of the artifacts that we have on display in the museum, and this is a state of South Carolina flag that was seized by a member of the 52nd Pennsylvania, William Smith, who I believe was a Wyoming County resident from his shopping. So after the talk, anybody who'd like to come down, take a closer look at the flag, please do so. But as far as that ceremonial sword that we're looking to get back, if anyone's inclined, if they'd like to donate for it, to it, I have a QR code on this paper here. You can just take a picture of it and make any donation that you feel inclined to through Venmo. That's really all I've got. Okay.
I have a lot of things to talk about, but the final thing for today is that Ancestry.com in the last couple of years has made it possible, if you are accessing the database, to access every muster roll for the Union troops. They're not wholly accessible in the South. But this is the one from Wyoming County for Company B, and there were 4 whole pages. We just have one here today. But you can go down, you can find out the names of the soldiers, their ages at the time that they enlisted or were drafted, and then some interesting fact about them. It's a very valuable database that the public has access to if you have access to Ancestry. And I just wanted to bring it to your attention because whatever your family's story might be, there's a record out there that you could build for yourself. And we want to keep their memory alive. Thanks again. Feel free to come up and look at some of these things.